So I'm here today to talk about the Second World War. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and tell you very briefly about my own family's experience in the Holocaust, which led me to write this book, and then I will discuss some of the stories in the book. Am I too close? And then we can have a discussion and I'll answer some questions. So if we can have the first slide, please. Yes. These are my parents, Leona and Philip Grunwald, who were married in Budapest in March 1942. Although the World War was raging, Budapest was the last country, Hungary was the last country to be occupied by the Nazis. So at this time there was no danger. The next slide, please. This is a family photograph from my mother's family. This is my mother, Leona, and this is her father, Armin, and her mother, Rosa, and her three other sisters. This is Clara, and you need to remember her because she becomes quite important. Armin Klein came to a very sad end. He was looking for... It's difficult to tell this story chronologically, so I'll tell you about Armin while you're looking at him. He was looking forward to my birth. I was the first grandchild in 1944, and he was on a bus when the bus was stopped by the Nazis, and they asked if there were any Jews on the bus, and there was no point in denying it because the documents were stamped, and he was taken off the bus and he was sent to Auschwitz, but the family didn't know that till later. It so happened the bus driver recognised him and went round to the family that evening and said he'd been taken off the bus, and they only found out after the war that he died at Auschwitz. I remember asking my mother why they didn't leave when they saw the writing on the wall, and she said to me, her father said, "Why should I leave my native land?" Next slide, please. I put this in merely for pleasure. It's not terribly relevant to the story, but my mother was the eldest, and I can never remember how many years there were between her and the youngest. And she was 78 when she died, and even then she was complaining about the fact that they all had to wear the same outfits. And it really annoyed her. But I think it was an enchanting photograph, and there's not a lot of joy in this story. Next slide, please. This is my grandparents' tombstone in Budapest, and that was to the mother who died in 1941. It was nothing to do with the war. She was a sickly woman. She had an operation which went wrong. But after the war, you can see that Armin Klein's name was added in 1944, and he died around about the time I was born. The next slide, please. Now, this is my mother and my father and me in January 1946, and this photograph is a normal family photograph, proud parents with a small child whose career with a tambourine did not get very far. It doesn't give you any inclination of what they've been through. Those of you who've been concentrating will remember I said that Hungary wasn't occupied until 1944, but the Hungarian fascists didn't wait till 1944. They were very busy with their own anti-Jewish legislation, and they organised forced labour for Jewish men, and my father was taken away in 1943 as a forced labourer, and he was sent to the Russian front, and he had a truly dreadful time. Although he survived, many of the people, I think the majority who were sent there, didn't survive because it really was awful. But he was very embittered by his experiences, and when he came back in March 1945, he wouldn't have any more children. My mother was quite keen to have more children after the war. He wouldn't have any more children. He said it wasn't a world to bring children into, and he tried to organise a business which failed, and in fact in 1955 he committed suicide when I was 10, leaving my mother to bring me up alone. And the reason why I tell you this is that it's important to understand that there weren't just the 6 million who died in the war, but people afterwards were still suffering, and many survivors did commit suicide, and others, although my mother lived to be 78, as I said, their lives had been crushed by the Holocaust, and she certainly lacked joie de vivre, and so it's not just a question of simply physically surviving, but it's surviving to live a good and satisfying life. And that's why I say that this photograph really belies the true situation. Next slide, please. This is us in England in 1947. I missed out the crucial bit. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go quicker than I normally do. The crucial bit was that I was born in July 1944, and at that time my mother had already been taken. My father was on the Russian front, as I told you, he was sent in 1943. He was allowed back on leave, surprisingly, and it was during one of those leaves that I was conceived, my mother said. So when the Nazis occupied Hungary in March 1944, she was already pregnant with me, and when towards July, when I was expected, she had to leave the flat where she was living and go into housing that was allocated for Jews. It wasn't yet the ghetto, and from there she went to a special place to have me. She wasn't allowed to go to the ordinary maternity hospital, and it was round about that time that Armin was taken off the bus. Sometime after I was born in July, and before November, when we were sent to the ghetto, my mother was told to report the next day. I don't know what she knew about what was happening to Jews, but she did try to leave me with her mother-in-law, because, as I told you, her own mother was already dead, and my grandmother said that she couldn't look after me because my mother was breastfeeding me. Obviously she wouldn't have been able to feed me. So in the end, the next morning, my mother had to go with me in her arms. And I know so little of the story. It's really, really frustrating. She told me the man in charge sent back the women with children. And that is literally all I know. I don't know whether he was a Nazi officer. I don't know whether he was a civil servant. He could have been part of the Jewish council, because they were made to deal with deportations as well. But had he not done that, now I wouldn't be standing here now talking to you all, and I certainly wouldn't have written the book. So when my father came back after forced labour, we'd been sent to the ghetto in November, and we were only there for 3 months, but a lot of people died in the ghetto. It was bitterly cold, there was very, very little food, and the Hungarian Nazis, the Arrow Cross, liked to take what shot at the Jews in the ghetto, so it was a dangerous place, even though it was only 3 months. So we were liberated. My mother went back to the flat where she'd lived with my father. He came back in March 1945, and she'd made up her mind that if she survived, she would leave Hungary because of the anti-Semitism.